At the resurrection, we are going to become spiritual beings, and we will not be limited by what we're limited to today. Flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of heaven. It's not possible for us to get to the Father's house without being remade or rebuilt or changed in the twinkle of an eye. That's why we have to be changed. You see, Satan cannot do this. And that's why he has to have people thinking that we're not going to heaven, because it's not possible for him to change us so that we can. And the King of glory shall come in. Who is the King of glory? That's the question. Who is the King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. This is Yeshua, the King of kings, that has returned from the heavenly temple. We see that in Revelation. He comes to earth, gathers his elect from the four corners of the earth, and he takes them and those that have arisen, and he has the sword that proceeds out of his mouth, and he slays the wicked. This is the picture we see in Revelation 19. Now on his return, as he goes back to the heavenly sanctuary, this is what's going on. So from the sanctuary, or from the city walls, if you will, in the heavenly Jerusalem, the question is asked. Open the gates, lift up your heads, O you gates, and lift up you everlasting doors, and the King of glory, who has returned from earth, will enter. Who is the King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. Lift up your heads, O you gates. Lift up, you everlasting doors, and the King of glory shall come in. Again, who is the King of glory? The Lord of hosts. He is the King of glory. This is the King of kings, who has returned from the earth. So these two segments in Psalms are actually prophecies of the Messiah's entrance back into the Father's kingdom, in the kingdom of heaven. You remember we looked at these verses where Yeshua said so many times that only the righteous are going to enter the kingdom of heaven. And so he was very clear that this is actually talking about, these verses are talking about the entrance into the kingdom of heaven, open to me and the righteous, as we looked at in the other psalm, that the righteous shall enter. Now, when is all this going to happen? This is the thing, is people are not looking at these verses, and it's because they've been pre-programmed. And I mentioned this last week, but I just can't overemphasize it enough, I don't think, is why has Christianity had this belief that when you die, you go to heaven? Well, they couldn't really figure out when you go to heaven and when you die and go to heaven. It's a continuation on of their life. They don't like the idea that there's going to be an end of consciousness. But the Bible teaches there will be an end of consciousness. The resurrection does not happen until Yeshua returns. It's in the resurrection that we go to heaven. But so many people now have been reserved to the idea that we don't go to heaven at all. Heaven doesn't have anything to do with anything. Well, the reason why people believed for so long that you go to heaven is because that's what Yeshua said. That's what Yeshua taught. But all of a sudden, people are going away from the words of Yeshua, and they're going straight back to prior to when Yeshua came, and they're looking at the Old Testament prophets and saying, that is all we have in truth. There's no advancement in truth. We're not keeping with the concept of divine revelation, that it is progressive. And we're going to see that. We're going to get into that right away. There were things that God had hidden from the very beginning of how he was going to rescue man out of the pit that we've been fallen into and eventually take them to the Father's house. And so that was a progressive revelation. It seems by looking at the Old Testament that the writers of the Bible did not understand the heaven concept. They didn't understand leaving this world and going to the kingdom of heaven. That didn't seem to be in the script in the Old Testament. So now we have the Messianic movement that's really moving forward, which we are kind of a part. You know, we keep the feasts, we keep the Torah as best we can as we learn. We keep the Sabbath, and we're doing those things that Yeshua taught, that Yeshua did. And so we're trying to follow him as best we can. But so many people are leaving off the plain words of Yeshua and going back to the Old Testament and saying that that is the sum total of all truth. And they're leaving off the concept of divine revelation and that it is progressive. So from generation to generation, the plan of salvation has been unfolding from age to age. So there was an introduction of a new idea in Revelation. As we go through from Genesis to Revelation, to the book of Revelation, we see additions to God's plan. And so we've got to take the Bible and we've got to see that concept. So we're going to go through here in some kind of detail, because this is what a lot of people are not, and it's almost like they're not willing to look at, because it conflicts with their concept of what they have accepted as truth. And like everyone, like myself, we don't want to believe that, you know, it's okay for somebody else to be deceived, but it's not possible for me to be deceived. I'll tell you what, if we get to that mindset, we are clearly deceived, because it is absolutely possible that we could be deceived. And the only way we cannot be deceived is to stay close to Yeshua and his word and the words of those that followed him. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't read the Old Testament. Not at all. It just means that the Old Testament is not all we read. You see, this is kind of the problem that the Jews are in right now, is they don't recognize the New Testament. And those of the Messianic world, they go to the Jews for their understanding for a lot of things, and guess what? They get caught in the traps of the Pharisees, the scribes and the Pharisees of today. Not where we want to be. So we're gonna look at some things here that I know we've kind of looked at them before, but you really need to understand these things as they're revealed to us in the New Testament. So this is the book of Ephesians. Ephesians chapter 1, 9, and 10. Now we've looked at this before, but we really need to unpack this Ephesians concept here. Having made known, so this is Paul talking here. Having made known, and I'm trying to skip as many verses as I can to get to the crux of the matter here to save us some time. But the book of Ephesians needs to be studied verse by verse. I challenge people on Paul's writings is, don't cherry pick his writings, his letters. They're just letters. They're not entire books. They're not like the book of Isaiah that has 66 chapters. They're short letters for the people of the church. And we should treat them as such. So when you sit down and you want to read Ephesians, sit down and read the whole book. or read the whole book in a day. So, read half in the morning, half of it, and then you get the concept. But if we just read a few verses here and there in Ephesians, we really don't get the purpose of why Paul wrote it. It was to be, his whole intent was that when somebody got the letter, they would read the whole letter. But so often we take Paul and we just cherry pick what he says, and pretty soon we throw out the law, or we, do something crazy because we're just taking a little segment out of what he's saying. Just kind of like what the news media does for people. Need to take everything in its context. So here we have Paul saying, having made known to us the mystery of his will, according to his good pleasure, which he purposed in himself. So I want to focus here on the mystery, because it's the mystery that is the important thing that we need to look at. Obviously, it's God's pleasure. It's his purpose. He's going to do something. So it's a mystery. So a mystery is something that's been hidden or is hidden. So Paul says that he's made known to us. Now, my question is, who is us? We want to unpack this because this is really, really important. Now, let me put this in a little bit of context of today. Is that God has made known to us a mystery of Daniel 7, Daniel 8, Daniel 10 through 12, Revelation 13, Revelation 17, that has been hidden from ages past. Are you with me? So at the appropriate time, God opens the book and we understand what it says. This is in keeping with what it says in Daniel chapter 12, where he says, Daniel, seal up the book until the time of the end. Well, that's exactly what happened, is the book was sealed until the time of the end. And lo and behold, we who are sitting at the time of the end are seeing things that have been hidden from ages past. This is how the Bible's written. It's the way God gave his mysteries. They would be sealed up, the mysteries would be sealed up until it was time for his people to know what has been hidden. So at this time, I'm proposing that the us is the apostles. At that time when Paul was preaching these things, God was revealing another secret that has been hidden. From Isaiah, from Ezekiel, from Jeremiah, and those prophets that had gone before. So now he had revealed something new, and this is what Paul was talking about here. Having made known to us the mystery of his will according to his good pleasure, which he purposed in himself. That in the dispensation, so that in the administration, that word dispensation could be administration. So God administers things. And so this is what, at the time of the administration, when the events are supposed to unfold the way he has hidden them in times past, at the appropriate time, at the appointed time, it says, the fullness of times. That word times there is the equivalent to the Old Testament moed, which is quite interesting. So at the appropriate time, when the time has met its fullness, and in regard to, I would say, very likely in regard to an appointed time, a festival time. So at a festival time, he might gather together in one all things in Christ, both which are in heaven and which are on earth, in him. Got to stop there. Full stop. So according to Paul, that when it's the perfect time, at an appointed time, and this we see this in the book of Daniel, at the appointed time of the end, we see this all over the place. So at an appropriate or appointed time, God is going to gather together all things. Now that's not just some things, that's all things. That's all intelligent agencies in his universe. That's what it says here. Both which are in heaven and which are on earth. Okay. Now, this apparently was a mystery that's been hidden. That's why you don't see this in the Old Testament. That's why Paul took so much heat. Those people that are advancing in truth take a lot of heat from those that are solid in what they think is truth. They are conservative, and the word conservative is actually not a good word in some sense. Because if you're conservative, what that means is you're trying to hold on to what you have. You're trying to conserve what you have. That is actually the wrong thinking for God's people. We don't only want to conserve. We only want to conserve that which is truth. We want to hold on to that which is truth. So in that sense, we want to conserve. But anything that isn't truth, we got to dispose of it. So we've got to examine things carefully to make sure they will stand up in the storm. So we've got to hold on to truth, but we also want to embrace things that are additional truths. So being a conservative in the true sense of the word is not really what we are. We want to conserve what is truth, but we want to advance in what is truth. So because God unfolds from generation to generation, truths as God's people need it. And so we're searching the scriptures to see the additional truths that have been hidden from ages past. And this is one thing that was hidden. And I believe that it's very interesting that the world now, the secular world, is looking into the heavens to see what they can see. And lo and behold, they're seeing all kinds of things that even Christians are in disagreement on. And I'm not in agreement with everything they're seeing, but what they're seeing is the universe is far more vast in the expanse that's up there, and there are planets and stars beyond our comprehension. So if there is other life out there, which I am fully believing there are, we know there's at least angels, and we know there's 4 creatures around the throne. But I happen to believe that I'm not going to limit God in his capabilities and his creative power, that there could be far greater expanse and intelligent beings than what we know. But what this is saying here, that God wants to bring into one all things in Christ. So when he resurrects his elect from the 4 corners, so those that have died in Christ, that's what Paul talks about in another place in Thessalonians, and those that are alive and remain, that's 144,000. He is going to join them, his family on earth, with his family in heaven. The question here is, that you have to ask, is where are they going to be united? Are they going to be united? Is all heaven coming to earth? Or are those on earth going to heaven? Well, if we read the very words of Paul, we can see clearly that we are going to be going to heaven for this union that it's talking about here. That's when Yeshua comes down with the voice of the archangel and trump of God, and the dead in Christ rise first. We who are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the air to meet the Lord in the air, and so we'll ever be with the Lord. So at that point, we are going to be taken to meet those in the heavens. Now this is very interesting, and I have to say this here because it fits so well. You see, Satan has a lie, and his lie is that people are not going to heaven when Yeshua returns. They're going to be on earth. You see, Satan can't take people to heaven. It's not possible for him to do that. God wouldn't allow him to do that. So he's created a lie in that we're not going to heaven. And so when the false Messiah returns, if everyone believes that we're not going to heaven and he's going to set up his kingdom here, guess what? They're all driven into this kingdom that the false Christ is going to set up here in the world. In Daniel chapter 12, when the little horn is destroyed, it says at that time, there's a time of trouble since there never was since there was a nation. It's at that time, at the destruction of the little horn. You see, that's prior to Yeshua's coming. But what that destruction of the little horn does, it sets the stage for the false Messiah. So when the false Messiah comes back and claims to be the return of Christ, because people are looking for the return of Christ, they're going to accept that Satan is the return of the Messiah. So I believe the reason why people fight this so hard is because they bought into the lie, because everyone seems to be teaching it. If everyone's teaching that Yeshua is going to set up his kingdom on earth, the Christians are teaching it, even the Muslims are teaching it, the Jews are teaching it, the Messianics are teaching it, that should be a red flag that there could be a problem with this teaching. And so my point being, if we follow the word of Yeshua and the New Testament prophets, something changed in the understanding of the Jewish believers. You see, they used to believe, and they still do, that the Messiah would come and set up a messianic age. That's exactly what was supposed to happen when Yeshua came the first time. But we know what happened. They rejected the Messiah. So God's plan changed, if you will. He had to adapt what he was going to do in the setting up his kingdom. And so things had to slightly change. And people say, oh, that's not true. No. Evil works, and God works with what he has. And so what happened in the rejection of Yeshua, things had to go a different direction to come to the place where God will restore his kingdom on earth. And so now we have a revelation of how this was going to happen through the Apostle Paul. So I want to do a bit of a timeline, which we're going to see this. We're going to see this. So we have Adam and Eve here. Okay, so all the way as we move forward, we see progressive revelation. So between Adam and Eve, we see, and if we take this to the time of Yeshua, so let's just say at the crucifixion. So we have revelation of what God's plan was. Now we're going to see this is what God was trying to do here was trying to give his message. So at some point here, let me see, where would I draw this? Around 1500 years after the creation, that was the time of Noah. So God did a reboot. So evil grew in the world for 1500 years, and then God gave his message to Noah again, and Noah was supposed to start with the gospel. And then we know around 2000, that's at the time of Abraham. So God took him out of Ur of the Chaldees, and Abraham was looking for a city whose builder and maker was God. That should be a clue here. We're going to look at these verses, very interesting verses here. So at the time of Abraham. So another 2,000 years. So at 4,000 years, that's when Yeshua came. And so the Jewish people, the time from Abraham to Yeshua was 2,000 years. So there was a 2,000-year period up until Abraham, another 2,000-year period, and then around the 6,000, the end of 6,000 years, brings us to our time. So now we've got another 2,000-year block in here. God's plan for the Jewish nation was to make one family. This was their purpose right here. Their purpose was to make one family on earth. And that was their job. And when Messiah came back, things were going to unfold a little bit more. And we want to look at that now. So we're going to look at some verses that support that concept. Because this is where people are making a mistake. Is that because evil in the world, God had lost his family right out of the gate, that he wanted to bring them all together. The purpose he had for Noah was to evangelize the world. And of course that didn't happen, so he destroyed those that didn't want to believe. And he started again. Then we get to Abraham. Abraham's job was to bring all the nations And that's, you read the promises that God gave him in Genesis 12 and 15, and we can see clearly that all nations would be blessed through Abraham. Well, that didn't happen because the seed of Abraham rejected the Messiah when he came, so God couldn't fulfill his plan through the Israelite people because they rejected him. Then the Gentiles were grafted into the household of faith, which really was Israel. Nothing changed. The Gentiles came into the house of Israel. They were subject to all the same laws and guidance that God had given, so nothing had changed. He wanted to make one family. So let's read this as we go in Ephesians, and we'll see this. So in the dispensation of the fullness of time, he's going to gather together in one. That's God's purpose, to bring his family back together. You see, his family was broken. Some of us know what that feels like. And God is trying to bring his family back together, both which are in heaven and on earth. You see, we've been separated from those in heaven. Therefore, remember that you, speaking of the Gentiles now, this is how God was going to do it. Remember that you, once Gentiles in the flesh, who are called uncircumcision by what is called the circumcision, so the Jews or the Israelites called the Gentiles uncircumcision, this is what it's dealing with, made in the flesh by hands, and I find this rather interesting, made in the flesh, called the circumcision made in the flesh by hands. We want to be circumcised in the heart by God through his Spirit. So there's a difference Paul is really referring to here that we don't often pick up. We see two groups of people, but we see a circumcision by hands and not by the Spirit here, a definite difference here. That at that time, so prior to Yeshua's coming, the Gentiles were aliens, it says. At that time, you were without Christ, without the Messiah, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel, and strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. So here we have what Paul's explaining here. So God, through Yeshua, wanted to bring the Gentiles and Israel together in one family. You see, before we can be joined with the family in heaven, we have to be one family here on earth. They're not two groups. There's not Israelites and Gentiles. That's why it says there's neither Jew nor Greek. What he means is we're all Israelites if we're grafted into the household of faith. Romans chapter 9 through 11 talks about this. And also Galatians. If we are Christ's, we are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. So we become under the household of faith, the household of Israel, which is of the lineage of Abraham. So it says before we had Christ, we were strangers and aliens from the commonwealth of Israel and strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. That's not a good place to be. But now, presently, and I need to make this point because this is very interesting, but now, as in today, back in Paul's day, now in Christ Yeshua, you who were once afar off have been brought near by the blood of Yeshua. So the blood of Yeshua, what does it do? It covers our sins. It dissolves our sins, if you will. It's kind of like a solvent. It works to dissolve our sins away. It turns us into the kind of people that God needs us to be. And so if the blood of Yeshua is doing its work and dissolving the sins in our lives, in the work of our sanctification, in the work of working out our salvation, if it's doing its work, then we become part of the body of Yeshua, which is of the household of Israel, those that are grafted into the household. So it says here, my point here in verse 13 is now in Yeshua. So this was a brand new concept for the Jews. They didn't get this. They didn't understand that. There were hints in the Old Testament, but for the most part, the Jews couldn't figure out how God could even save the Gentiles. They were deemed as dogs and all kinds of things. They didn't even want to touch them because they were said to be unclean. So this was really a revelation, and we don't often think of that, but Ephesians is a revelation to the Jews at that time. It says, "For he himself is our peace, who has made both one." This is my point here. So he's introduced in Ephesians in chapter 1, verse 10. He says at the fullness of time, he wants to bring his family on earth with his family in heaven and bring them together. So the first phase of that was what the Jews were trying to do, and then the culmination of the Messiah coming, he wanted to unify his body on earth. So at that time, this new light, if you will, that came was how God was going to bring all people together in Yeshua. So those that believed in Yeshua, both of Israel and of the Gentiles, became one body. This is how the New Testament church was born. And this was not good news for a lot of the Jews because they thought they should be the high and mighty ones in the kingdom of the Messiah. But Paul's saying, oh, no, that's not how this works. So now in Ephesians, we move forward a little bit more in Ephesians, and it tells us here in Ephesians chapter 3, verse 1, "For this reason I, Paul, the prisoner of Yeshua the Messiah, for you Gentiles, if indeed you have heard of the dispensation of the grace of God, which was given to me for you." So what is the grace of God? The grace of God is his mercy. It's his favor. So his favor was given to Paul to give to the Gentiles. So it's a knowledge of God's forgiveness of them, his favor towards them, to bring them into the household of faith, which is the house of Israel. So this is what Paul's work was to do, to give this good news to the Gentiles. How that by what? What does it say here? How that by revelation he made known to the Jews? Is that what it says? He made known to Abraham? He made known to Isaiah? He made known to Jeremiah? No, that's not what it says. We need to get the point here, is that by revelation, by specific revelation to the Apostle Paul, he had information that those that had gone before did not have. You see, the problem is we're not looking at the progressive revelation of what God gave his people. Our heads are so deep into the Old Testament, we're missing the additional revelations that God gave to his people. How that by revelation he made known to me the mystery, as I have briefly written already. What was the mystery? He told us what the mystery was, is that he was going to join those in heaven, all those in heaven, with those on earth to become one. One what? One family again. This breaking up of God's family would be united again. That was what God is doing, and that's what he has been doing for the last 6,000 years. He's been working to bring his family on earth as one. Now, this is interesting when we look at the words of Yeshua in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. Yeshua tells us that the gospel of the kingdom has to go to all the world, and then the end shall come. I'm proposing that the gospel of the kingdom is his unification of his people on earth with those in heaven. That's what Yeshua taught. You will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven unless your righteousness exceeds that of the Pharisees. So there's so many places where Yeshua said, this is our final destination, our unification with the family that is in heaven. And that's what Paul said here. He said, I've already written briefly, and that's Ephesians chapter 1, verse 10, where he spoke about this mystery that God was going to do. And I I would suggest that this is still a mystery for people today because they're not reading what it says and trying to grapple with the meaning of it. Goes on to say, by which, when you read, you may understand my knowledge in the mystery of Yeshua. So this is, again, he's doubling down here. He's saying the mystery of Yeshua. What is the mystery of Yeshua? It's the bringing together into the Gentiles, or taking from the Gentiles and bringing them into God's family here on earth to be unified at the appropriate time, which is still future, with his family that is in heaven. And that's the mystery that he made known to Paul. And he goes on to say here, which in other ages, this is a very interesting word here, in other ages, which was not made known to the sons of men, as it has now presently been revealed by the Spirit to his holy apostles and prophets. This is not talking about Isaiah, his prophets. This is talking about like Peter, James, John. These are the prophets that he's referring to. How do I know that? It's easy. In verse 5, it tells us that. In other ages. And this is can be a little bit confusing. But when we go back to that word, that other ages, that's generations. That's all those that have gone before. What Paul is saying here is there's a mystery that's been hidden from all other generations. But now, this word now here, G3568, means presently. This is a mystery that has been hidden in all other generations, but now has been made known to us. This is a brand new revelation. And I propose this is what people are not seeing today. And this is why they're not seeing that we're going to be united with God's family in the heavenly Jerusalem, as we're going to see more details as it comes to us. So these are mysteries that were hidden. So, again, up until the time of Yeshua and the apostles, now they had additional revelation of the additional plan. So once he brings the Gentiles into the household of faith here through Yeshua, it says in verse 10 of chapter 1 in Ephesians that in the fullness of time. I believe that fullness of time, what it's talking about here, is the second coming of Yeshua. At the second coming of Yeshua is when we're going to be taken to the Father's house and be brought in contact. That's the fullness of time. And that's interesting because the fullness of time could very well be referring to, as it is the word that's used, into a moed. So is it possible at the moed, at the appropriate moed, when we are to be delivered at the time of the resurrection, so we need to go to the festival calendar and find out when the time of resurrection is in the festival typology, and we see at the Passover is the very timing of the resurrection. And so at the fullness of time, at the appropriate moed, he's going to take us to the Father's house, and that's when the gates of righteousness will be opened for the righteous, and that's when the King of Glory will come in, and we will be then on display to God's family in the heavens. I don't know about you, but that's pretty awesome information. And this is actually the gospel of the kingdom. And this is exactly what we're looking at. So let's keep going here. This word G3568, the now, this word, when we go back to and look at the meaning of it, primary particle of present time. So now. So this is not talking about that this information was beforehand or in other generations. This was even hidden from the likes of Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Isaiah. And I use those because they're the major prophets of the Old Testament. But this information was hidden from them. Why? Because God had a purpose for them. The purpose for them was to forecast the coming of the Messiah. The primary purpose was the coming of the Messiah and then the unification of the Gentiles with the Messiah. Once we get to that place, God shifts gears and gives more revelation on the furthering of his plan. When he's going to not only unite the Gentiles and the Jewish believers or the Israelite believers, and he's going to unite them with his family in heaven. That's what's just ahead of us, is that unification. Hebrews talks about this. Very interesting as we go through the chapter on faith in the book of Hebrews. So what is faith? Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not yet seen. So we are hoping for things that we don't see real clearly, but we have evidence that they will happen. We have evidence because some of the prophecies that were forecasted many years ago, thousands of years, have come to fruition, and now we're looking forward to those things that are yet to come. And this is this unification of all of God's family, not only on earth, but those in the heavens. For by it the elders obtained a good testimony. So through faith, we can obtain a good testimony because it's our faith that helps us to walk forward in our understanding. But as we walk forward in our understanding of what we have accepted as truth, and as we get more solid in truth, what is truth and what is error, we get more understanding. We get more revelation of what God's plan is. We not only get more revelation through his word for those things that have been hidden from ages past or generations past, we also get more revelation individually for our own lives on the direction that we need to go ourselves. By faith, we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that the things which are seen were not made of things which are visible. So God speaks things into existence without things that we can see. And that's what makes him God and us not. Hebrews 11, 4 through 6, by faith Abel offered to God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, through which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of the gifts, and through it he being dead still speaks. So this is, one might say, well, why are we going here? Well, this is very important because Abel operated with the knowledge and the understanding that he had of God and his plan. And through the knowledge that he had, he operated through that knowledge. He was righteous through that knowledge. So he kept in check those things that were opposed to God through the faith that he had in the understanding of God's plan. So how does that affect us? Well, it affects us in this way. The more we understand of God's plan, not only for his people, but for us as individuals, the more certainty we're going to have to shun those things that are evil and do those things that are righteous. And he did that through faith. So our faith in not only what God has done in the past, but our faith in what God is going to do for us in the future is going to keep us on the straight and narrow, and we will obtain the reward that he has for us. So it's extremely important that not only we have an understanding of what God has done in the past, we have to have an understanding of what he's going to do in the future, because that's how God keeps us on the straight and narrow. So it's by faith that Abel obtained a good reward, so to speak, and this is how we're going to, by the faith that we have in what God is going to do for us in the future. By faith, Enoch was taken away so that he did not see death, and was not found because God had taken him. For before he was taken, he had this testimony that he pleased God. And I know there's all kinds of ideas about Enoch and what happened to him, but the reality of it is, I'm just going to take it for what it says here, that God took him and he did not see death. Now, to me, that means he didn't die. He was taken. Enoch actually represents all those, like the 144,000, that will not see death, and they will be transported, if you will, or translated to the heavenly kingdom when Yeshua returns. So Enoch is that kind of people. Why? Why? Because it says that he walked with God. In other words, when God was walking with him on the earth, he didn't get distracted. He followed God all the way, and so God deemed that he was righteous in all of his ways because he always did those things that pleased him. So Enoch kind of represents all those in the time of the end that have learned the lessons of obedience and don't deviate in any way other than God's ways. And that all those things they do please God. So where did he take him? I believe he took him to the heavenly kingdom. And that's where he is, somewhere up there, because God took him. For before he was taken, he had the testimony that he pleased God. The 144,000 are going to have exactly the same testimony that Enoch had, and that's why they will not see death. We are striving to be among that group of people. It's going to be very interesting. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. This does not mean that God killed him or laid him in a grave. That's not what this is talking about. This is a revelation in the New Testament in the book of Hebrews. You will not find this in the Old Testament. It just says that Enoch was taken and was not. This explains it fully that he did not see death. So where did he go? God took him to the heavenly Canaan. But without faith it is impossible to please him, for he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. So without faith, it's impossible to do what God is asking us to do. Faith in what? This is not just talking about faith in Yeshua, that he died for my sins. It's faith in God's plan. So unless we understand, I believe this is what it's talking about, unless we understand completely what God's plan is, it will become impossible to please God. Now, here's a case in point in the context that we're talking about. If I believe that the Messiah is going to come and reign on this earth, and it's actually a false Messiah, it's going to be impossible to please God because I'm going to bend the knee to a false Messiah. So if I don't understand God's plan, if I don't have faith in God's plan, in the truth of God's plan, it will be impossible for me to please him in the time of the end. I've got to have a knowledge of all the truth that God needs me to have. And this is in keeping with what Yeshua said. When he, the Spirit of truth, comes, he will lead you into all truth and show you things to come. Friends, it is so vitally important for us to have all truth. We need to be striving for all truth. And that means when we see something is in conflict with what Yeshua taught and what the apostles taught, the greater light that the apostles had, what they taught, if something is in conflict with what they were teaching, we have to discard that teaching. It's just that simple. And we've got to move forward in what Yeshua said, all truth. And then he said he will show us things to come. If the coming of a false Messiah is in what Yeshua was teaching in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21, which it is, he says, when you see the abomination that's spoken of by Daniel the prophet, you better understand. So this is what he's talking about here. So it's very vitally important for us, if we're going to live until the time of the end, that we are brought into contact with all truth, and that means truth displaces error. So those things that we're holding on to that are error must be discarded as we learn more truth. It's just that simple. It will be impossible to please God if we don't move forward in our faith as Paul did in his. Paul became an enemy of his own people because of the revelations that he had. Goes on here in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 7 to 9. By faith Noah, being divinely warned of things not yet seen, moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. Here again, this chapter in Hebrews is so important for us here in the time of the end, when our faith is going to have to be so strong for us to get through a time of trouble such as there never was. So Noah was divinely warned of a flood coming to destroy, a judgment, if you will, the same thing that we're facing here in the very near future, a judgment upon all flesh. He moved with godly fear because of his faith, and he did something. He prepared an ark, a safe haven, if you will, to get him through the storm. This is what we should be thinking about at this time in Earth's history. Yeshua said it will be like the time of Noah. Is it possible that some people are having conviction by the Spirit to prepare arks of safety in the time of the end? I just want to throw that out there. By which he condemned the world. So by people preparing for a storm coming at the end of the world, preparing arks of safety, if you will, we are actually condemning the world by our works. Not necessarily by our preaching, by what we're doing is condemning. By what we're doing is condemning the world by our actions. And they became heirs of the righteousness which is according to faith. So us following the Spirit, by the moving of the Spirit in our lives, we're condemning the world, because the world is going to go into judgment just the same way as it did in Noah's time. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to the place which he would receive as an inheritance, and he went out not knowing where he was going. By faith, he dwelt in the land of promise, as in a foreign country, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he waited for a city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is who? It doesn't say that the builder and the maker of this city was Zerubbabel and Ezra. I'm talking Second Temple times now. This is not what it's talking about. It's not talking about a temple that's going to be built in the time of the end. This is a temple. This is a city it's talking about. A city that has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. We're going to get to in Hebrews, he's going to talk about this city that Abraham was looking for. This is the heavenly Jerusalem that Abraham was looking for. These all died in faith, not having received the promise, but having seen them afar off, were assured of them, embraced them, and confessed them that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. You see, they were pilgrims on the earth because they knew that this wasn't their final destination. So they knew that God was somehow going to set up his city here on earth. When is that going to happen? We didn't know that. They didn't know that until this final revelation that God gave through his later prophets, the likes of John and Paul. For those who say such things, declare plainly that they seek a homeland. So what's this homeland that they're seeking? And truly, if they had called to mind that country from which they had come out, they would have had opportunity to return. This is a really good lesson for us. We can always go back to where we were before, but we want to press forward and go to the final destination that God has. Here we have it in verse 16. But now they desire a better, that is, a heavenly. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. Wow. This is exactly what Yeshua was talking about. Paul, we know, had special revelation of Yeshua. He spent one-on-one time with Yeshua, and Yeshua, I believe, unpacked this. And this is what we have in the book of Hebrews. So now the revelation of the heavenly country that they were looking forward to. And there it says that God has prepared a city for them. This is what Yeshua said to his disciples before he left. I'm going to go and I will return. You guys can follow me not now, but you will follow me then. This is John chapter 13. And he said, I'm going to prepare a place for you. So this is very interesting. He's going to prepare a place specifically for us. Why? Because there had not been a place in the heavenly Jerusalem for us. There's an addition, if you will, because we were cut out of, those on earth were separated from those in heaven. So Yeshua has gone beforehand to prepare a place for those who at his return he will take them to the heavenly places. I don't know about you, but I'm looking forward to the place that Yeshua has prepared specifically for me. That's what he said. I'm going to prepare a place for them. This is what the writer of Hebrews is talking about. He's gone before to prepare a place for us so that when he returns, he will take us to that place at the Father's house. But now they desire a better. That is a heavenly country. That word country is in italics. It actually just says a heavenly. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a place for them. Again, this is talking about what this heavenly is. That's actually very interesting here. We've got the Greek there, and the meaning tells us above the sky, celestial, heaven, high. This is not talking about a place on earth. This is talking about a place that God has prepared in the heavens for his people. This is the heavenly Jerusalem that it's talking about here. And this again here is talking about this place in the heavens, the sky, by extension heaven, implication happiness, power, eternity, specifically the gospel of Christianity, air, heaven. So in the context of what we're talking about, and it's interesting how it combines it with the gospel is the good news of the kingdom that Yeshua spoke about, the kingdom of heaven. The final work of God will be to bring into unity those on earth that have accepted his plan and the gospel, his unification of his family on earth and his family in the heavens, which was a divine revelation after Yeshua came to the disciples. Now, we move forward in Hebrews. Now we're looking at by faith. This is an extension. There's no separation in this letter. So we need to combine 12 with 11. This is what we're looking for here. But you have come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, to an innumerable company of angels. Have we come there? No, we haven't come here. But we've come here by faith. You remember it says Abraham looked for a city whose builder and maker was God? This is exactly the same promise we're looking for. Now it becomes unpacked. This is beautiful. The writer of Hebrews unpacks this. Now by faith we are going there, but literally we are going to go there when he returns. So he's telling us what we have to look forward to here. You have come to Mount Zion and the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, to an innumerable company of angels. So we want to see here something very interesting. We've not come to the Mount Zion on earth, which was a type of the heavenly Mount Zion. It was all a type of what God's ultimate plan was. His plan for the earthly Jerusalem was to be a type of the heavenly Jerusalem. Jerusalem, the city of peace, the city of the great king, was only a symbol or a type of the heavenly Jerusalem. It was supposed to be a city of peace on the earth to represent the heavenly Jerusalem. The temple on earth was to represent the temple in heaven. It was all a type. The earthly priest was a type of the heavenly priest in Yeshua. The high priest was a type of the high priest in the heavenly sanctuary. The whole thing was a type. Not just the sanctuary, but the actual city of Jerusalem. The Mount Zion was a type of the heavenly Jerusalem. To the general assembly and church of the firstborn who are registered in heaven. So we see here, let's look here, we have Mount Zion, which is a place, and it's in the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. So that's defined very clearly there. To an innumerable company of angels. I'm suggesting here that the general assembly and the church of the firstborn are not talking about the angels. This is another entity, another group of beings. It's the general assembly. When we look at the general assembly here on earth, the way the earth is set up, they have a general assembly. It's called the UN General Assembly. These are the heads of states that come for a meeting, and they call this the General Assembly of the United Nations. I would propose that this is patterned after those in the heavens. You see, Satan's been at work here to set up his kingdom here on earth. And through his agencies, he's just set up a kingdom that resembles the kingdom of heaven. He set up a United Nations, a general assembly, if you will, of the nations. What's his purpose? His purpose in the United Nations is to unify the world under one head. Wow, this is amazing. So he's not doing something that he's engineered in his own understanding. He's patterned this after God's system in the heavens. You see, God has a system in the heavens that unification of all of the heavenly agencies are under one head. And we see this in the book of Job when it says the sons of God came and presented themselves in the heavenly court. This is the general assembly, if you will. They are called the church of the firstborn. So who are the firstborn? If you go into the book of Matthew, and I believe it's in Luke, you can see how from generation to generation, I believe it's in Matthew, where it goes all the way back to the time of Yeshua. Might be in Luke, I can't quite remember which one. Takes the lineage of Yeshua all the way back to Adam. And it says the son of, the son of, the son of, the son of. Adam was the son of God. That's what it says. So it changes gears when we get to Adam. Adam was the firstborn on this planet. He was the firstborn. He was the son of God, sort of speak. I propose that all this vast universe out there has a general assembly at appointed times when all the firstborns out there meet together. This is where we're going. We're going to be introduced to all the firstborns of the worlds out there that are beyond our comprehension. We will be introduced. That's what Paul is talking about in Ephesians, when we're going to be united with those principalities and powers in the heavens. This is what we have to look forward to. the general assembly in the church of the firstborn who are registered in heaven. Not on earth, but in heaven. To God, the judge of all, to the spirits of just men made perfect. Now, I have struggled and struggled with this, and all of a sudden it clicked. To this, who are these spirits of just men made perfect? Well, here again, we go back into the book of 1 Corinthians in chapter 15, and we can see what this is talking about. We are told through Paul that the first Adam was earthy, and the second Adam, which he's talking about, Yeshua, became a spiritual man, became a spiritual being after his resurrection. So he was made like unto us when Yeshua walked this earth, but after his resurrection, he became a spiritual being. This is very interesting. He says that in Corinthians, once we are resurrected and transformed in the twinkling of an eye, we are going to become spiritual beings. Now, that doesn't mean we just float around and we're invisible, because when Yeshua returned and spoke to his disciples, he had a being that they could see. But the major difference with Yeshua at that point, he wasn't restricted by walls and fences and gates and things like this, because he just appeared in their presence without opening a door. Very interesting. So at the resurrection, we are going to become spiritual beings, and we will not be limited by what we're limited to today. That is how we're going to get to the Father's house. You see, if we go up in an airplane, we have to have a pressurized cabin. We can't survive out there. I mean, I've been up in airplanes at 30,000, 40,000 feet, and it actually has a thermometer on there on the back seat. You can see what the temperature is on the outside of the airplane. It's minus 70 Celsius. That's pretty cold. I wouldn't survive out there. But apparently, when we are transformed, when we are changed in the twinkling of an eye, when this mortality puts on immortality, we're not going to be limited by what we're limited by our flesh and blood. You see, that's why flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of heaven. It's not possible for us to get to the Father's house without being remade or rebuilt or changed in the twinkle of an eye. That's why we have to be changed. You see, Satan cannot do this. And that's why he has to have people thinking that we're not going to heaven, because it's not possible for him to change us so that we can. And so when the false Messiah comes and they believe that he's setting up his kingdom on earth, and there's not that major change in us, that they're going to think that the Messiah has indeed come, because they're not seeing that change, because they're not looking forward to the change. So we are going to be the Spirit. We are going to be spirit beings. And it says, to the spirits of just men made perfect. That's the changing of our beings, our flesh and blood nature, into spiritual beings. And that at that time, we're going to be made perfect. Now, this is really interesting when you see what Paul's talking about here. Even in Acts chapter 17, and maybe we should just go there. Let's look at, we got to wind this thing up here.
Just is holy. The word means holy men.
Yes, it means holy men. So at the appropriate time, and that's what we read, at the fullness of time, God is going to unite us with the heavenly kingdom, and that's when we are made holy at that time. That's at the appropriate time. That's in the future. So in Acts chapter 17, and this is Paul again, this is the special revelations that Paul had. He knew what God was going to do for his people in the time of the end. And in Corinthians, in the book of Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, when he's talking about all this abundance of revelations that he had, he wasn't even allowed to tell people all of these revelations, but he made known in certain places little glimpses of these revelations that God would take us to the heavenly Jerusalem to meet with his heavenly family. So I'm looking in Acts chapter 17. Acts chapter 17, we want to pull a little bit of deeper meaning out of this. This is, of course, the story of Mars Hill, when they're worshiping all the different gods, and there was one god they didn't want to miss. They made an edifice to the unknown God, and Paul says, I want to talk to you about this unknown God that you guys don't really know too much about. He's actually the creator, verse 24. God who, in chapter 17 of Acts, verse 24, God who made the world and everything in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands. He dwells in temples in the heavenly Jerusalem. Nor is he worshipped with men's hands as though he needed anything, since he gives all life, breath, and all things. And he has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times. So their pre-appointed times, that's a direct reference to the appointed times of worship. That's what it's talking about in the context and in the wording here. Pre-appointed times, that word times is the same word that Paul uses in other places that in reference to the appointed times of God's moeds. And the boundaries of their habitation, so that they should seek the Lord in the hope that they might grope for him and may find him, though he is not far from each one of us. Okay, so this is what we want to look at here. Very interesting. So God created the festival calendar that we might find him. And until we find him, this is the interesting part, until we find him, we're going to grope and mope around to try and find him. That's where we find ourselves today. So we are finding him through his festival calendar. Very interesting. He's the Lamb of God. When did he come? He died at Passover. So through an investigation of the Passover and all of what it means, we're finding a knowledge of God and his plan. We get that in Pentecost. We get that in Tabernacles. All of it brings us to a fuller knowledge of who God is. He set boundaries for our habitation, for our dwellings. That's not talking about fences and gates. That's talking about we are locked down on this planet until we find God. It's at that time, at the second coming, where our boundaries are let loose and we will be taken from this planet to the heavenly Jerusalem. This is what Paul is talking about. Somebody says, oh, that's not what Paul's talking about. When you look at other places that Paul is talking about, it's very clear that God has us locked down on this planet until we have a full knowledge of God, or a fuller knowledge of God, and that it is safe for him to take his family on earth to be brought into contact with his family in heaven. Why does it say that in the book of Hebrews that the spirits of just men, or men that have been made holy, it's not until we're holy beings that we can be brought into the heavenly Jerusalem, where there is only holiness. So this is so vitally important for us to understand. We are not going anywhere until we are holy. So that should be a real sobering bit of knowledge for us. We've got to be sanctified and made holy before we can go there. How does it happen? To Yeshua, through Yeshua, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the blood of sprinkling that speaks better things than that of Abel. See that you do not refuse him who speaks, For if they did not escape who refused him who spoke on earth, much more shall we not escape if we turn away from him who speaks in or from heaven. Okay, I think we should stop there before we move forward. We're going to move forward in this, and we're going to see more evidence that our destination, our intermediate destination, is the Father's house. And it will be after that time, after our time in the Father's house, that we will return here, and then the kingdom of heaven will actually be set up on this earth, and that will be where the center of all things will be at that time. We're going to go forward and see that as well. So let's pause there. Let's have prayer, and we'll continue this next Sabbath. Father in heaven, we thank you for your gospel of the kingdom. And we ask that you continue to work on our hearts, lead us step by step. We want to end up at the Father's house, the only safe place to be. We ask that you be with us now through this coming week. And Father, we ask that you help us to share the knowledge of your word with others so that they too can gain the blessing of our inheritance. We pray this in Yeshua's name. Amen.